Hello, friends and listeners. Before today's show, I'm taking a brief moment to tell you how significant your feedback is to me. Anytime a listener has reached out, whether in person or in some kind of communication, to share the joy or perplexity or wonder or enthusiasm you may have experienced for one of my guests, it's brought me great gratitude and joy. Every point of contact with a listener is a gift and not one that I take for granted. Well, as it happens, the Conversing production team and I are currently seeking out a little more feedback. In fact, we're running a short listener survey with Fuller Studio to hear about your podcasting habits and preferences and any ways that you'd want to see Conversing evolve in its next phase. If you're willing, could you just take a few more minutes with Conversing today and visit fuller.edu/survey and offer your thoughts? I'm excited for the future of the show, and I'm eager to hear your ideas about how we can make better contact and serve you and your concerns and questions as well. Again, please head to fuller.edu/survey or click the link in the show notes to help us imagine the future of Conversing. Thank you again so much. Now, on with the show. I'm Mark Labberton. Welcome to Conversing. So thankful today for the chance to have Andrew Hanauer as our guest on Conversing. Andrew is someone who I feel like I should have known and in some way did know much earlier than we actually recently met. But he is the president and CEO of an extremely fascinating and important effort, which is called the One America Movement. This is an organization that he helped found and is one that is attempting to address, in light of faiths, plural, the realities of toxic polarization that so deeply describe many, many aspects of American life these days. It's a courageous place to be in. It's a work that is obviously needed. It's a complicated and important thing. And I'm so delighted, Andrew, for the chance to have a chance to discuss it with you.
Oh, I'm honored to be here, and thanks for having me.
Andrew, tell people a little bit about your background and how a person would ever become ready to not only lead, but before that, even to dream up and found an organization called One America.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because we joke that One America is an aspirational title these days. We even saw a book recently about how someone's proposal for creating two Americas. It was very well thought out. You know, this state will go here and this state will go here. And I thought, yeah, I guess that's not the direction that I'm thinking, but.
Right.
Yeah, I was born in a secular Jewish home. I really didn't have religion growing up. I wasn't bar mitzvahed. And when I went to college, I converted to Christianity. My roommate was evangelical Christian. His dad is a seminary professor in the Presbyterian Church in America. And I spent a lot of time in college with the Christian fellowship group. And what I loved about it was this idea that in an environment where your value was judged by how good looking you were, how smart you were, how much money you had, how funny you were, there was this one place where your value was different than that. It was okay to be socially awkward. It was okay to not be getting A's, which I certainly wasn't. And that stood out to me. That really moved me. So I ended up marrying a woman who had grown up in rural Arkansas. I grew up in the Bay Area in California. And so her family, my friends crossed the political spectrum, different religious beliefs, different political beliefs for sure. And so I don't think that makes me ready to do this work, but it certainly makes it feel important.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. When would you say that you first became aware of thinking in terms of something like, quote, toxic polarization?
So I would say, I had been aware in college. I had come in and met people for the first time who really disagreed with my views of politics at the time, and I remember the experience of thinking, well, it's not possible for these people to actually have ideas that I should learn from, right? The only thing for me to do was to educate them, to tolerate them, or to oppose them if necessary, right? And then I remember actually having experiences where my close friends would say things that, and then I would say, well, actually, that's kind of logical. It makes some sense. But when you change your mind about something as important as the nature of God and the universe, it seems silly that you couldn't also change your mind about Social Security policy or something like that.
Right.
But in 2016, as I was watching my social media feed become just gross, what really stood out to me was the way that, not that people disagreed about who should be president or about political views, it was something else was going on, that something else was happening, and people were becoming a worse version of themselves.
Yes, yes.
Democrats were becoming the worst version of Democrats, and Republicans the worst version of Republicans, and so forth.
Yes.
And so to me, I wanted to ask the question, how can our faith be a response to that? And how can people of faith make sure that if you're a Christian, you're a Christian first, and that your political views are subservient to that? If you're a Jewish person, that you're living out your Jewish values first, and that your political views are subservient to that. And I think that was the genesis of it, was really seeing that toxicity in people that I cared about and loved.
So at that time, when you see this growing crisis unfolding, did you have people in mind that you thought were particular exemplars, or people that either historic or contemporary that you felt like, yeah, it's somebody who was working in that space doing what that person's kind of doing that feels like the right thing to pursue? Or did it really almost feel like you were making up something for a space that in this way hadn't really existed before?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think I've ever gotten that question before. That's great. It's interesting. I think that in some ways this is brand new to our country. In some ways, we're just learning what we should have already known. And so what I mean by that is the type of peacemaking work that we're trying to do here in the United States is work that until very recently, many people who are American were doing in other countries. It's also the kind of work that, frankly, we should have been doing in our own country to reconcile, to heal from the injustice of slavery, for instance,
right,
to the end of the Civil War. And so in some ways, it's work that already had to be done and wasn't always being done.
Right.
But I think, I had been raised in sort of this nonviolence belief system of the civil rights movement and Gandhi. And then when I became a Christian, I found a theological, actually, when you actually read Martin Luther King's writings, it's very, very Christian. It's very theological. And so I had that language for it, that loving your enemies was part of my faith.
Yes.
But I think what I've learned over the last 7-8 years is it's much bigger than only that. And I think the United States has to exercise some ideas and muscles that maybe we just hadn't been exercising for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. The phrase toxic polarization is one that I haven't actually studied whether it has pre-existed the era that we're having to be in right now. Certainly polarization, toxicity are words that are not uncommon, obviously. The formation of it, I don't remember, for example, that anyone in the past would have described slavery as toxic, even though it was worse than toxic. And the polarization that existed during the Civil War, I'm not sure would have been described as a study in the toxic polarization that's taking over the United States. So I realize eras, times change quickly. Word games play, language games change all the time. But why do you think toxic polarization does for your work what I think it does in many people's lives? It names a thing that now feels like that's exactly the right two words to use to describe this. Is it a different experience, a different quality, a different calibration? If so, where does it come from that we would land with that verbal construct?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think of it less as analogous to the Civil War. I think it's a different era with different dynamics. And I think it also, that analogy then allows people to think, well, there was a clearly more moral side back then. And therefore, the analogy now is that one side needs to win and the other side needs to lose,
Yes,
which was
yes.
absolutely the case in terms of the institution of slavery.
Right.
I think the more important question is how have our divisions changed over the last 20, 30, 40 years? And what we see very clearly is a shift from disagreement over policies and beliefs to a fundamental sense of identity opposition, that my team and your team are in conflict,
Yes.
and that only one of us can win.
Right.
And I think part of that too is that we have two sides that have roughly equal power in society when you think about the red-blue divide. And so it's not analogous to a lot of other times in our history in terms of that. So you have, for instance, Republicans increasingly and Democrats increasingly saying they don't want their children to marry someone from the other party,
Yes.
even as they're more okay with them marrying someone of a different race or a different religion. And so it is defining ourselves fundamentally first as political and then putting ourselves in opposition to another group with disastrous impact on our society.
Right. Right. Take us into places, choose as you would, one or two examples of trying to go into an exact vortex of toxic polarization and describe what you're feeling, seeing, hearing.
Yeah. Well, and I think so many of us have felt it in our own families, right? Or
Yes, right.
Our own lives. I think that there is a confluence of things that we do. So we believe the other side is more extreme than they actually are.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that they are more monolithic than they actually are.
Mm-hmm.
And we believe that they are more badly intended, like their intentions are worse than they actually are.
Yes.
And I think what we see then is people not wanting to engage because they have these misconceptions about the other side. And again, that's an aggregate. Are there individual people who are hateful and violent? Of course, 100%. And so you have these just misperceptions about other communities. Mm-hmm. But then what you also have is this push to be on a side. So you look at the conflict in the Middle East right now, and I'm very focused on how that's playing out on social media here in the United States.
Yes.
And what you're seeing is not enough, I think, compassion for civilians in both the Israeli and Palestinian community who are being killed, and just this very focused sort of which side are you on?
Yes.
We do this with slogans, we do it with flags, we do it in the way that we signal to our own community who we're with. And what that's doing is it's, I think, increasingly creating worse conversations. It's increasingly alienating people who might actually agree with us. It's increasingly radicalizing people who don't agree with us. We are getting better at speaking in code to our own community in ways that make them say yes. And we're getting profoundly bad at speaking to communities that we're not part of. And that's really dangerous.
Yes, yes. It's an amazing thing to have been, as I have been over the last decade, the president of Fuller Seminary. And Fuller's theological spectrum is pretty broad. And you have people at a variety of different places. And as a group, certainly, I would say, I saw actually relatively little of this. Not that it was non-existent, just I'm saying relatively little from what I was seeing elsewhere. But when I was in various congregational settings, when I would be talking with different people or teaching a course or whatever it might be, I was aware that in the seedbeds of all these various faith communities that I was having contact with, that there was just this intense undercurrent. And the number of pastors that I spoke to who sought out counsel, refuge, assurance, grounding, feeling like they're losing their mind because they can't figure out how to negotiate a congregation that was purple or a congregation that was severely and dramatically red or dramatically blue, was really a complexity for them. And well, I felt I had certain tools. What do you find is lacking? What are the keys that you're discovering as you're doing this work that seem to be so missing in so many contexts? And then what's your theory about why they're missing?
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations. It seems like Fuller had pretty good leadership during this time to avoid that. I think this is really, really so central. Right now, leading anything is very hard, whether it's a Fortune 500 company or a university,
Yes.
A church for sure. What we hear from so many evangelical and other Christian, actually mainline too, pastors is this idea that their congregants are putting their politics as their orienting worldview, and then their faith is under that. So they're listening to what people say on social media and cable news, and then they're listening to their pastor, and they're wondering, is my pastor going to signal to me that he is in the same group that I'm in, or that she's in the same group that I'm in? As opposed to starting with biblical truth, starting with the teachings of the faith and of the pastor, and then going to cable news and the social media and saying, does this fit within that? Jesus says, love my enemies. What am I seeing on Instagram? Right. And so I think the thing that is missing often, I think for clergy then is that's a monumental shift that requires not just a toolkit or a training or something like that. It requires spiritual struggle. It requires all of the aspects of Christian community and faith to be put to bear against that in the Christian context. And I think in other faiths as well, they're struggling with similar dynamics. I think that the other thing that's really missing is that clergy are really tired. They're burned out. Many are quitting. 40% in the Barna survey say they've considered quitting. When you ask them why, the top 3 reasons are isolation, feeling burned out, and then political division, which many folks would say is actually causing much of the first 2.
Yes, right.
So part of the work that we do through the Matthew 5:9 fellowship, which is a fellowship we've built for evangelical pastors, is just helping them with that, helping pastors meet other pastors who are going through the same thing they're going through.
Right.
How are you handling this? What do you need to succeed? We have to invest in leaders, not just give them tools.
Right. And are you finding as you have those gatherings that the landscape is sort of what you would have predicted that they're sharing, or are you finding surprises in that?
It's interesting. I think it is predictable in the sense that so many clergy are navigating similar dynamics. If you look at the Jewish community, the Jewish leaders we work with, many of them deal with the same set of dynamics. They might change from more purple congregations to bluer congregations. Similarly, in Christian churches, there's different dynamics depending on that. But writ large, when we talk to a pastor in New Mexico, we're not often shocked by what they tell us because it's very similar to what a pastor in Minnesota is dealing with.
Right.
I think the thing that we haven't fully uncovered is the rate of sorting. So many people have left churches or synagogues because they didn't like the politics of the dominant, group. And in the Protestant world, if you don't like your pastor, you just go down the street and there's another church, right? So I think we have yet to...
Or you get a new pastor.
Or you get a new pastor. So we haven't fully, I think, realized how much have folks self-sorted out of these congregations.
Yes.
And so when 2 years ago we were trying to help leaders navigate those differences, now we might be helping them navigate a different thing, which is a siloed monolithism, I guess. So, yeah, it's interesting.
That is very interesting. So, how would you describe then the strategy? I mean, you have this really fairly audacious title, as you said, aspirational, One America, the One America movement, and how do you break then down into a strategic approach to what is such a massive, complicated, layered reality? Yeah.
So the first thing we do is we kind of reject what we jokingly call the nonprofit industrial complex, which is like the idea that we as a nonprofit are going to solve the problem. right? Like,
we're just not thinking big enough, Andrew.
Right. Yeah. We have 20 something employees, which is enormous growth from a few years ago and is not going to solve the problem by itself. We believe that faith is itself a powerful answer to toxic polarization.
Yes.
If our faith communities were as healthy as possible, if our faith leaders were equipped, were navigating these divisions, the whole country would be better off. So our job is, how can we help support them?
Yes.
So what we think is we can do that strategically in a couple ways. One is we can support groups of clergy that are kind of from the same community. Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned, we have a fellowship for evangelical pastors. We have a fellowship for Jewish leaders. Mm-hmm. We're working on developing others for other faith traditions. The second thing we can do is model. So in a small number of communities around the country, we have an organizer on the ground who does nothing but work to bring faith communities together across divides to work together. So imagine a Southern Baptist church, a synagogue, a mosque, a mainline church, all getting together and saying, we don't agree on abortion, we don't agree on the Middle East, but we at least agree on homelessness in our community or the school kids in our community needing support.
Right.
So how can we work together on that?
Yeah.
So we're not going to do that in 50 states and 3,000 communities. We're doing that in enough places where we can tell really important stories about how this is possible and people can do this. So that's the work we're doing. And I think in 2024, we're going to be really going public in terms of events and opportunities for faith communities and faith leaders to really be a third space, a different space that isn't co-opted by either political party, and that can be a refuge from the toxic negativity out there.
Right. There's so much important work to be done. An organization that you may or may not know of that's called Global Immersion is really a peacemaking movement. And it was started by two guys, one named Jer Swigert and the other John Huckins. And their work has been, a lot of it has involved cohorts of people that work together for a stretch of time, at least a year, for example, or sometimes 2 years. It almost always involves some kind of travel, often to the border, southern border, but also to Israel-Palestine. And a lot of it has been to try to immerse people's exposure to people whose life circumstances have given them, let's just say, a whole lot more practice at long-term questions of reconciliation and peacemaking than necessarily the average pastor in an average congregation may have encountered until the last decade, let's say. And I just am curious, what's the theory of change that you're working with? How do you understand what it is that you're trying to get at and then to change the reality that you're seeing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think immersion trips are really powerful, and we have not built them ourselves, but we have done them within communities. We've done, coming to different members of a synagogue coming to a church or vice versa. I think that for us, again, we believe that the answers to toxic polarization lie within our faith tradition. So I talk a lot about Jesus saying to love your enemies, but he also very practically says, pray for people who persecute you. That is a thing that you can stop and do in the middle of your day. It doesn't have to be persecution. It can just be that person who's annoying you.
Yes.
Right. And you can stop and pray for their well-being. And that is by definition, it is very hard to imagine how much of an impact that would have on our society if everyone was doing that.
Yes.
So the answers are there. And I think for us, the question is just, how do faith communities best live that out? How do they best model that? And if they're doing that, the country's going to be in a much different place. And I think faith will be in a much different place because I think more people will feel compelled by what faith communities are doing and want to know more. So for us, that's the theory, is that faith leaders can have a huge impact on shaping their congregations. Those congregations can have an impact on shaping the country.
Yes.
But fundamentally, the answers are there within that community. It's not us doing something that moves them some other direction.
Yes. One of the questions I've been pondering is, what does it take for the church to actually live its identity? And that gets at what you're talking about. It's really what is our identity? It begs that question, which I think is not clear for many people in a lot of faith communities, where it really is, as you said, in reverse order, that politics leads and faith follows rather than the other way around. Mm-hmm. But it's also that people don't necessarily know how to sort through how to actually live the faith. And I guess I'm curious, many others, not in this conversation, but in other conversations, will say things commonly like one of the great shortages in Christian congregations is a lack of people who have actually been, quote, discipled in their faith, really by an intentional development and formation process as just an exposure process to the language of faith or to the liturgies of faith, but not to the daily in and out practices of faith. Do you have any response to that? How do you think about these things and helping to shape people?
Yeah, I mean, I think moral formation, spiritual formation is at the center of what our country needs. I think we are, in many ways, experiencing the impact of not doing that well enough. But I think the thing that is liberating for me is just speaking for myself as a Christian, right? I can't control what, scandal-plagued pastor does. I cannot control how people who simply don't want to like religion feel about religion, other than through my own actions.
Right.
So, as Christians, I believe we're supposed to act in ways that when people see you act that way, they think, wow, like, I can't believe someone is doing that.
Yes, yes.
And I think that if, Christians, I think often spend a lot of time worried about the fact that the country is feeling less Christian or that people are leaving churches. And I think the thing that we have to get back to is how do we act in ways that make people want to know more about why we act that way. Right. So rather than lecturing other people or judging other people, we should be doing what Jesus did. We should be, feeding people who are hungry and caring for the sick and loving our enemies and washing people's feet and all of those things.
I'm Mark Labberton. You're listening to Conversing. There's an amazing book that I've been reading just recently. I'm not finished with it yet, but it's called The Patient Ferment of the Early Church. Mm. And it's describing the contrast between a church in culture that has seen itself as associated with power and therefore with domination, compared to an approach that that sees itself much more as yeast, which is just gently fermenting the culture. And in the context of that, creating a church that's really very different. And the author, Kreider is his name, is exploring what it means that the church grew as it did because of this gentle ferment, not because of an aggressive evangelism. Now, I think historically speaking, I'm not really in a position, as not being an early church historian, to actually arbitrate, which I think is necessary, another polarization. But I do find it really quite amazing to think in those terms, and have been spending a fair amount of time recently working on a meditation that I'm writing for something that is about the role of Jesus's metaphor of yeast as the expression of the power of the kingdom of God. It's a really, really different power than a power that is doing other things. And what you've just pointed to is that kind of power, much more the quiet presence of the kind of patient ferment, to use the title of this book.
I love that, and I need to get that book. And I think the other thing about that in our society right now is that there's many people who would not express an interest in religion, but there's a lot of Americans right now who are deeply hurting. and
Yes.
they're feeling isolation and loneliness. They're feeling the toxicity and negativity in our culture. They're left. They fight these political battles in their social media feed or with their families, and they feel empty afterwards.
Right.
People want something better. It's more hopeful. It has more grace in it and forgiveness and patience. And I think that the stats show that the vast majority of Americans are burned out by our political culture and just kind of belong to the just make it stop, tribe
Yes.
of American
Quite.
politics.
Quite.
And so if religion fails to speak into that, it's a big failure.
It's a huge failure.
Yeah. That's what we should be good at.
So I'm curious, Andrew. I mean, you grew up in a secular Jewish home. You come to faith partly out of this very interesting experience that you expressed about the diversity and the acceptance of different people in different places. I came to faith in college myself, and I remember myself having exactly those experiences and feeling like, wow, I mean, this is a collection of people I would never otherwise be with. This is not this is not the gathering of, quote, my people in the way that my sociology had shaped me, right? Mm-hmm. And I was so moved and changed by that. It was just like it was the beginning of that long process of realizing that we're being given a new heart and a new mind, and that it's worked out in these really ordinary, unexpected new relationships and associations. But I'm just wondering, in terms of your own experience, here you become a Christian in your late teens, early 20s, and then you really experience this vortex. Has that created for you a crisis of faith? Like, how could the church so betray itself that it has thrown up new questions of faith or doubt for you? Or has it not done that? And if so, why did it take the direction that it took for you?
Yeah, that's interesting. No, it's deepened my faith tremendously because I view faith as the answer to it. I view it as the thing that's missing. And of course, the church, the Jewish world, the Muslim world, like all religious institutions are run by flawed people who often betray the values of their faith, just like all of us do in our daily lives as people who sin. Sure. And so there are times when obviously I'm disappointed in the faith community, so to speak. But that's to me that is to be expected of any human institution. And the question is, what is the answer to this morass that we're in? And to me, if I didn't have my faith, I don't know where I would go to look for those answers right now. I don't know that I certainly couldn't be doing the work that I'm doing. And I think the organization that I'm part of has become more deeply rooted in faith since we started, in part because it has become more and more clear to us that toxic polarization is a spiritual crisis. And so it requires an answer that can meet that crisis.
Yes. I'm really not surprised by that answer, because you wouldn't be doing what you're doing if that wasn't true. But I do find it moving because as you know, so many people are finding this as a moment of despair, rejection of faith, rejection of church, and cynicism and just disillusionment. The deepest kinds of disillusionment is more common than your response. So let me just push a little bit further and say, as this was going on and you were finding it driving you deeper in your faith, what is your understanding of why that would have been true, when for many people seeing exactly the same things as you were seeing disillusioned them and caused them to distance their faith?
Yeah, well, and I think some people have been hurt by the church in their personal lives, right? Or even if they weren't hurt by the church, so to speak, they grew up in a community that they thought they knew. Yes. And then things changed and they thought, wow, like, this isn't who I am. I can't be part of this. Yeah. I think that for me, I actually experienced that across the political spectrum. So I remember versions of progressivism that I think are nothing like some of the worst versions of it today. I remember versions of conservatism that are nothing like the worst versions of it today. And I think from my perspective, maybe because I have this weird sort of journey to the center of things that is different from some people, I'm looking out at the whole picture and I'm seeing the whole ecosystem kind of being polluted, as opposed to saying I was part of this community and this community left me, and so I'm betrayed by that. So I think people are leaving churches just like I know people on the center left in the secular world or otherwise who look at the extremes of their party and go, oh, these people left me. Like I was with these people and now they're somewhere different. Just like some members of the Republican Party are looking at the extremes and saying these people left me. So I think a lot of people are experiencing that. It's just when you experience it with something as powerfully important as your faith community, the hurt is really deep.
Yeah.
So I feel very lucky that I haven't experienced that. And I get why people have.
Were there people along the way, either friends, family, colleagues, who really became a new kind of champion together for this cause? Did you find that was what was forming too? Was that there were, obviously there's people on the staff of One America, which are, I presume, supporters of the same vision, obviously. But I'm just wondering, as a person, as a member of a congregation, as part of a town, as part of a family, how were relationships around you helpful in your own story?
Yeah, no, they're huge. I mean, it's one of very interesting. Someday I could write a book about doing this work. So, like, for instance, if you work for a political cause and your friends and family are generally on your side of the political spectrum, you get a lot of, yes, go get them. You know, you go back
right.
to your parents or your siblings or whatever, and they say, oh yeah, go win that battle, right?
Yes.
For the staff of our organization, who range from left to right and different religions and beliefs and races, oftentimes they go back to their family and their family says, what do you do again? Oh, and you work with those people? And so there's a loneliness that comes from that. And
yes.
the ironic thing is that then it becomes possible to form your own little isolated bubble of bridge builders or whatever you want to call it. I think we're really insistent on the idea that we're not trying to build a country full of centrists or moderates.
Right.
We want everyone to be the best version of whatever community they're a part of. And our organization, my personal life, are made better by people in my life who don't agree with me and who don't agree with me constructively and who are willing to tell me when they don't agree with me.
Right.
So I think the question isn't, have I surrounded myself with people who agree with One America's work so much as, do I have people in my life who are committed to the idea that we can get somewhere positive together if we are open-minded about other people's perspectives.
Yes. I think when Tim Keller wrote the essay that he did a number of years ago about why, in a technical sense, a serious Christian would have a hard time being either a Democrat or a Republican, he was not rejecting the parties as much as he was acknowledging that they can't be the control center. They can't be the defining foundation from which a Christian has sufficient enough resources to be able to understand and consider the fullness of all that life on planet Earth is, and all that human existence is, and all that human relationships require. And so I'm curious, in the work that you're doing as a community of people, given that it's a community of people of different faith and different religions and different experiences, how do you find the commonality in one faith itself? I mean, One America itself, to work out a foundation that supports you across all the platform of what you're really trying to do?
Yeah, I love that way of thinking. I totally agree. I think that, we as an organization, the first thing that we recognized was we had to live it ourselves. We had to do it ourselves. We couldn't go around the country telling people to come into relationship with each other across dividing lines if we were all white or all Democrats or all Republicans or all Christians or whatever.
Right.
So that is itself a mission, right? Having 20 something people who are on opposite sides of all sorts of issues find ways to work together. We have staff members in rural Mississippi and Upper West Side of New York. And so we have been working, especially over the last year or so, to try to live out a set of values that we've identified as a way to think through how do we do our work well. So, for instance, one of our values is to challenge ourselves and others constructively. And so if we're in a staff meeting and someone says something and another person says, I want to actually disagree with that, and here's why, that's praised, whether that person is right or wrong.
Yes.
At least it should be praised. We're not always perfect. Whereas if you don't say anything, you're actually not living out the value. You're not challenging others. So it's trying to create a different culture, a different way of being than the one that we're seeing that's so toxic out in the country.
Right.
And it's hard. It's really hard. But when you do it on a day-to-day basis, when you go to work and your teammates are people who don't agree with you, you do develop, I think, a sense of pride and like, man, this is my friends who are only hanging out with people just like them. Like, they don't get it. This is something that is really, really meaningful. That's going to stay with me for the rest of my life. Yes.
Yes. It is amazing how those experiences and practices can actually be become so pervasive in a person's life over time.
Yeah.
Do you have common practices?
Yeah. So we have a sort of a hybrid work office. So we have an office where we have staff, and then we have people who are scattered around the country. So one of the things that we have to figure out is how do you create a rhythm, cultural rhythm, with people who are not in the same place. So we have retreats where we do relationship building, and we have all staff meetings on Zoom where we try to make the Zoom all staff meeting as painless as possible. We have opportunities to meet out in the world and experience each other's work and learn from each other. We have a coffee shop that's virtual. We have what we call an idea jam, where someone will come with a question about religion or politics or spirituality or whatever it is, and we engage it. So we're trying to create the kind of water cooler that you have in an office when you have an office, but then not an office. So we're learning as we go how to do that.
Yeah. What would you say is the hardest thing you're facing as an organization?
The hardest thing we're facing as an organization is, I think, the combination of how hard the work is with how little funding there is for, in the meta sense. Like, we have grown tremendously. We're very well resourced compared to a lot of nonprofits. We're very grateful. And at the same time, we're very concerned about the long-term health of our staff to be able to do this kind of work over the long period of time. Because, as I said, you don't always have the family support. You do have to show up the day after a Supreme Court decision or an election or a war, and show up next to someone who you might really disagree with about that decision.
Right.
And so we have to invest in our employees in a way that helps them do this work. We can't get to where we need to go as a country if we don't invest in people who are trying to do work like this to help our country.
Yes. Are there other organizations that you would see as co-laborers who you think are doing some of the same work, albeit with their own particular spin, but that you see as colleagues?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're really lucky. There's a whole ecosystem that's come up in the last 5 to 10 years, but there are a number of groups in the evangelical space that have been partners of ours. We're actually working together on something called Cross the Lines, which is an effort to really support clergy in the Christian world. So groups like Arabon, Colossian Forum, Amplify Peace, Undivided, Christianity Today. We think there's some amazing groups that have been doing this work for a long time, like Resetting the Table in the Jewish world. And I think there's some really important research happening from groups like More in Common. But we also think about this as like a healthy country requires that the different pillars of that society be healthy. So corporations, faith, politicians, et cetera. And so there's a group called the Future Caucus, which works with Democrat and Republican lawmakers, bringing them together at the state level and at the federal level. And so they're a great example of a group that's doing this work with elected officials. We're doing it with faith leaders. Ultimately, we need all of the different aspects of society to be able to be resilient to the divisions that we're facing.
Right. It is amazing and inspiring to me that the crisis has caused what you're describing, and a number of initiatives from different places, different traditions, different theological perspectives, as well as political perspectives, trying to find the kind of grist, if you want to use that image, or the kind of fertilizer, if you want to use that image, to try to catalyze something that really is different and new, and that seems like trying to do so under pressure of a time like this, where the results actually matter. You can't force it, but you can deliberately, consciously stimulate it. And I think somewhere in that zone is where it sounds like you're working, and where I know those other organizations that you mentioned are also seeking very much to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What would a metric be that would, if you were to imagine we go through the 2024 election and we're now at 26, 27, what are you hoping to add in this coming year in particular, given the election and all of its potential fractiousness?
Yeah. So I think if we think about the two things that we can really do in the next year, one is what we're already focused on, which is how do we support as many faith leaders as possible. Last time, 2020, we had actually something called the Election Support Forum, which was just a bi-weekly or monthly Zoom call where faith leaders would come on and we'd say, how you doing? What do you need? And they would say, do you have something about how to handle disagreements between our congregants over the election, things like that. So we're hoping to do that in a much bigger way this year. But the other thing that I think we really have the ability to do is, as I said, kind of create a different space. It's very toxic to go on social media right now. It's very difficult to be part of school board meetings, faith meetings, certainly political stuff. And Americans are hurting. They're also angry and outraged over various different things. They pour out into the street, they protest, oftentimes ending up protesting each other over binary things in ways that aren't constructive, that don't get us closer to solutions. We really want to create an environment where people can come into a different kind of place, hear different voices, hear different perspectives. We want to do that in communities all around the country. And so we'll be launching a type of a tour or event series where we just hold events at faith communities that are more positive, more unifying, but not by ignoring our differences or ignoring the hard issues, but by actually modeling how to constructively get somewhere on them.
Yes. Well, Andrew, I love that you're taking this on, and I love that you're finding so many important collaborators, both the people on staff, but also the people that you're reaching. I think it's landing as one of the great responses in one of the most painful periods in recent memory in American life. And I just really, really appreciate the spirit and the capaciousness of the way that you're trying to approach this work. And I will think about and pray for you as you continue to do this. You and I are partly connected because we happen to be in a group that meets every Thursday. It's a kind of drop-in group that is hosted by Jonathan Rausch. And I guess I'm curious, just as we close, how does a group like that, which I'd like you to describe, how does a group like that figure into your own formation as you continue to want to learn and grow yourself?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. I mean, that's really kind of you. And I think the work that we're trying to do is really important. And I think this moment is really important, but it's all of our work. Like, we all have a way to be part of that.
Exactly right.
Even within your own community, just saying, I agree with you, but maybe we shouldn't say it that way, or, whatever is the moderating influence over the worst impulses of the people that we love.
Yes.
We're in a group together that It includes pastors, rabbis, journalists, nonprofit CEOs, and was founded by someone who's an atheist who wanted, I think, to better understand religion in American life. And I'm deeply moved by something that he said to me, which was that, 15, 20 years ago, he basically wrote something to the effect of, if religion dies, great. Don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Right.
And in this current moment, he's saying, I was wrong. We actually need healthy religion in our country. So for me, the group is part therapy session, people who in some cases are navigating the same things I'm navigating, but also just an opportunity to listen, to really smart people like you and like some of the other people on that call talk about really hard issues. I think we had one recently about assisted suicide. And I think we all have to keep learning. Like one of the things we say in our events is we ask people to close their eyes and say in their heads, of all the 7 billion people on earth, I am the one who's the most right about everything I believe. And if that sounds good to you, like that, not a lot we can do for you. But if we just have the humility to say, I might actually be wrong about something, it opens up everything else. And I think we need more of that.
I agree. And I think that group is a privilege to be part of and does have, I think, the humility dimension that is central in making something like that actually work. Well, I wish you all the best, Andrew. And this is such important work. And I agree that it's one that I share and we share and every listener to this shares in. And may we be on with it as expeditiously and wisely and humbly as we can.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe to Conversing on your favorite podcast app to listen to new episodes as they're released. And please leave a review. Conversing is produced by Peter Laberton and distributed by Fuller Studio.